of a cliff. Realize there must be more to life than this. Reaching for the stars, traveling so far, like a dragonfly. Just grab my hand from him, sin with me tonight. I run away. Reaching for the stars, traveling so far, like a dragonfly. Keep your secrets there, take them everywhere. Just you and I run away. I run away.
Breathe you in like oxygen. Oh, in an otherwise suffocating world, I'm reaching out for arms, I'm drowning in the open-ended love we're making, girl. Exhale the past, inhale a future that lasts. Change my heart, change my mind. For the last time, wanna believe in the life I've led. I don't wanna leave another word unsaid. You know my heart will follow you in tomorrow. In tomorrow. Shared my evidence you once really cared. I'm reaching for a hand to pull me up, one open to an everlasting love. Exhale the past, inhale a future that lasts. Change my heart, change my mind. For the last time, wanna believe in the life I've led. I don't wanna leave another word unsaid. You know my heart will follow you in tomorrow. In tomorrow.
afternoon and welcome to this news special. We are awaiting an announcement on extending the alert levels. The press conference is to be fronted by Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and Dr Ashley Bloomfield. Currently, the country is in level 4 lockdown until at least midnight tomorrow. The outbreak is still growing. The number of new cases revealed today is 35. That's 35 additional community cases, bringing the total number of cases in this outbreak to 107. Breaking it down, 99 of those cases are in Auckland. Wellington has 8 community cases. As of 8 a.m, 13,230 contacts have been identified, and that number will rise. Well, waiting alongside me with the press for the press conference is Jessica Mackay, our political editor at Parliament. Tēnā koe, Jess. Well, many of us here in Auckland are resigned to an extension of the lockdown given those rising cases and given the speed and the ability of the Delta variant to infect. How likely is it that we will see any relaxing of the restrictions?
Yeah, I think that resignation is warranted, Wendy. I think there's a wide acceptance that Auckland will be in lockdown level 4 for at least a short time into the future. I think that's reasonably inevitable looking at those new case numbers today. I think what we will see today, though, is some kind of plan for the regions that haven't been impacted. So I think we'll get a bit more certainty around that today. What is important to point out, though, is that there are still quite a few contacts in the South Island. So a lot of people are saying, look, Fortress South Island is still holding up. But a lot of people, thousands of people left Auckland when there was outbreak in the community, and there are still a large number in the South Island. So I think they'll be weighing that up when they make the decision today. To have a look at the context of this, it is interesting to look back to April and last year when we were in level 4, and there's a few things that are worth pointing out that we can use to compare to this time. The first one is that last time we didn't come out of those heavy restrictions until we'd done a full transmission cycle of the variant, so that's 2 weeks. The other thing that's really interesting is that once we'd reached the peak, it took 12 days in lockdown to start to bring those numbers down. Now, at the moment, we just don't know whether we've peaked or not, what numbers we're going to see. To compare again with April last year, the highest we got to was 89 cases in one day. When you look at the latest numbers today, which are 35, we're still a way off that. It really is going to be a balancing act for Cabinet this afternoon. They've just wrapped up their meeting and are heading down here soon to present the announcement to us. The things that they will be weighing up is giving people certainty. I think for a lot of people that's what they're crying out for, that's what's very important, but at the same time you don't want to lock us into a longer lockdown than we need to be at. So I think they're going to try and strike some kind of middle ground, giving us a bit of certainty but making sure that there is still some flexibility depending on what happens, because I think if we've learnt nothing over the last 18 months, it's to expect the unexpected.
Yeah, that is very true. Well, you mentioned contact tracing and how there were some contacts in the South Island. Contact tracing is the key to moving forward, isn't it, and getting a handle on all of this. What is the latest on that?
So more than 13,000 contacts have been identified. So that's a huge number. Let's dig into those numbers a little bit more. 42% have been tested. So those are the people who have been identified and tested. About half of them are still yet to be contacted. So that paints a bit of a picture of where we're at with the contact tracing. So those are people who are either family members or were at a location of interest. So I think that's a really interesting point to make. The other thing that is really interesting is today we've gone to 107 cases in this cluster, so this extra 35 takes us up to 107. Now, 72 of them are definitely linked to others in this cluster that we're calling it. There are 35 left that are still being tested, but officials say that they're pretty certain those cases are all linked together as well. So that does make a big difference in terms of the certainty that it's likely that all of those cases are linked and they know where those connections are. So that's another interesting point that they will be weighing up.
Yeah, you mentioned linking the cases, and we know that case A was from Devonport, the man from Devonport, but officials are still trying to trace the link. Any update on the source, the original source?
Yeah, so what's so interesting, when that first Devonport case came up, that sort of becomes the centre of the investigation, but then as things go on and we start putting pieces of the puzzle together, we can see that that was probably a case reasonably far down the train of things. So they are narrowing in on the Crown Plaza, which is an Auckland hotel that's an MIQ facility, and particularly on an atrium walkway where there is some shared airspace with members of the public. Now, narrowing in even further on that, they've identified from CCTV footage 6 people. 4 of those people have been tested, but there are still 2 that they haven't been able to get in contact with. And they're trying to trace those 2 people to make sure they go and get tested and to question their movements and add those to the list of places of interest. So police are helping out with that investigation. So it's interesting that perhaps, police are coming away from their normal duties and now investigating people and tracking down people who have been seen on the CCTV footage, perhaps being linked to this case. So some more details emerging on that today as well.
That's right, and urgency is the key, isn't it? Well, we're waiting for Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and Dr Ashley Bloomfield to arrive behind you at Parliament. And tell us about Parliament. It is being suspended.
Yeah, we are hoping that they will be arriving very soon to give us the latest on that, because I know a lot of people will be waiting for that. Here at Parliament, the call has been made to suspend Parliament. So basically it'll mean that the MPs who are out in their electorates around the country won't be flying back here to Parliament to do the normal debate, do the normal question time, which you often see on the news in the evening. So it means that the MPs will be staying in their electorates and working from home. Now, some people say, look, why would we care that much about that? But the thing is so many big decisions are being made in this place at the moment, and it's really important to be able to hold the people who are making those decisions to account. And National and the ACT Party were pushing for the government to do question time so that they would be able to get questions out and answers out on behalf of the public. Now, the call has been made that they just thought that it was better to have a committee, a select committee process to do that and to be able to ask those questions. So that's the decision that has been made. Now, the Prime Minister and Dr Ashley Bloomfield are walking in at the moment, and they will give us that all-important decision about what is going to happen. But in terms of Parliament, for now, the MPs will be staying back in their electorates, and it means that the only way that we can get questions through is through that parliamentary committee process. So that will be the way we'll get information. But now let's go to that announcement.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Good afternoon, everyone. Cabinet met this afternoon to confirm our plan to stamp out the Delta outbreak we're currently experiencing. As you might have already heard, there are 35 new cases reported today, 33 in Auckland and 2 in Wellington, bringing the outbreak to 107 cases in total. 6 days into the outbreak, we are building a picture of Delta's spread. We have identified the source of the outbreak, a returnee from New South Wales, who was briefly at the Crown Plaza on the 7th and 8th of August before testing positive and being transferred to quarantine at the Jet Park. In recent days, we have retested all staff at both the Crown Plaza and Jet Park. To date, this has given us no further clues. We'll continue, though, with that source investigation and update you as we go. We have processed 154,439 tests across New Zealand in the past 6 days, a record amount of testing for a 6-day period by quite some way, equating to about 3% of the population. While we're seeing high case numbers at the moment and will continue to for the coming days, the number of tests does provide some reassurance that we're finding cases because we are looking broadly. In Auckland, that is even greater, 108,000 tests taken, a good representative sample of the population of Auckland. To everyone who has turned out to be tested, thank you. I know for many, you waited many hours in queues, so your perseverance is greatly appreciated by the entire team. The additional stations that we've set up are making a difference now too, and wait times are starting to come down. We've also undertaken extensive wastewater testing, which to date has returned positive results for sites in Auckland and Wellington only. So while we're starting to build a picture of Delta's spread, there remain a number of unanswered questions. And with Delta, more certainty is needed. In his recent report to the government, Professor Sir David Skeggs said the Delta variant will be more difficult to control by testing and contact tracing alone. And we're already seeing that. That's why our move into an immediate lockdown was so important. Delta had a head start on us, and we needed to catch up as quickly as we could. You can see that head start in our transmission rate, or the number of people that on average each case is passing COVID-19 onto. Early estimates suggest that number may be 6 or higher. You may recall from previous outbreaks, this number needs to be less than 1 in order for the virus to be stamped out. So we have some way to go yet. As a result of the head start Delta had, and the fact that it does move rapidly and effectively, we have more than 320 locations of interest. Our more cautious approach to these locations means we also have over 13,000 contacts recorded. Far more than we've had in other outbreaks, but deliberately so. That does mean that our data collection for each of those sites is different too. In the past, if we had a large event like an awards evening, we would assess all the people a case likely had contact with and treat those as our most at-risk individuals. Now, Delta and our more cautious approach means we are treating all those in attendance with caution and asking them to isolate and be tested. This approach does present some challenges though, so we won't always have the same certainty that we've reached all those that we need to. Level 4 does help us overcome this issue. There are some additional reasons why this alert level remains important. Firstly, with the head start Delta had, it did manage to create contacts all over the country. This heat map shows the location of our known contacts. And as you can see, they are certainly not isolated to one part of New Zealand. As I said, these are also our known contacts. For some of the very, very large locations of interest, reaching everyone will not always be a perfect process. Caution is required. Secondly, after going into level 4, we allowed people a window to get home, as we've always done. During that grace period, almost 8,000 people flew out of Auckland to get home. That was the right thing to do to allow people to isolate safely. But that means we have, in essence, had only 72 hours, with the exception of some of the movement out of Queenstown and the Inter-Islander, where everyone across the country has stayed put. And the third reason level 4 is important for all of us is because we don't yet believe we've reached the peak of this outbreak, or necessarily the edges of it. You'll recall that we pointed to early modelling suggesting we needed 8 to 10 days before we would hit a peak. We're on roughly day 7, day 6, so cases may continue to get worse before they get better, and I know we're all prepared for that. That does mean, though, that the safest option for all of us right now is to hold the course for longer. On that basis, Cabinet has decided that all of New Zealand will remain at level 4 for an additional 4 days until 11:59 p.m, Friday, 27 August. This will allow us to have additional data and assurance as to whether the virus has spread from our existing sites and how contained it's likely to be. These settings will be reviewed this Friday, and we'll give you an update in the afternoon. To give you a sense of what we'll be looking for in order to decide whether parts of New Zealand are ready to move down alert levels, we'll be looking to see if any new cases emerge outside of Auckland, whether wastewater results stay negative, and if cases do emerge in other parts of the country, whether or not they are cases that were already in isolation. For those in Auckland, I have different news. You'll see this continues to be the primary location of cases, Here we believe we know enough to say that your time in level 4 needs to be at least that full 14-day cycle that we've used in the past. So Cabinet has decided to give the city that certainty. And to tell you what we already know, Auckland will remain in alert level 4 until 11:59 p.m. on Tuesday, 31 August. And we'll review those settings on Monday. In both our cases and the decisions that we've made today, you can see we are still very much in the thick of this outbreak. But I can also tell you that Cabinet and the health team remain confident. Delta has changed the rules of the game, but we've changed our approach too. We've hardened our alert levels, widened our contact tracing, required more mask wearing, and we are testing more people. It is absolutely possible to get on top of this. We just need to keep it up and ensure that we're not in restrictions any longer than we need to be. So here's a reminder of the things we all need to keep doing while we remain at alert level 4. Number 1, stay at home. If you're not an essential worker, you should only be leaving your house for the essentials and some fresh air. If you leave home, please wear a mask. And do remember, there are some people in our disabled community who are not able to wear face coverings and have exemptions from doing so. Please remember to be kind. 2, if you are a contact, isolate. Contacts are the people most likely to have the virus and pass it on. Please stay at home. Get others to do your groceries. Only leave to get a test. If you need support, please do ask for it. 3, wash your hands often with soap, then dry them, and of course, cough into your elbow. And 4, get vaccinated. Now is the time to drive up our vaccination numbers. Over 74% of people aged 40 plus are already booked or vaccinated. But in reality, we need that number to be as close to 100% as possible. Please do it now. If you're not booked in yet, please go to www.bookmyvaccine.nz and do your part for the team to help prevent the need for lockdowns in the future. These rules will be so important. To leave level 4, we need to follow them closely. In line with our own recommendations, as we did last time New Zealand was at level 4, we have temporarily suspended the sitting of Parliament for 1 week on the advice of the Director General of Health. While, of course, we want to ensure that representatives from across the House have the ability to scrutinise the government at this time, physically bringing MPs from across the country to Parliament does pose risk. That's why for this week, we've asked all ministers to make themselves available to appear before Parliament's select committees, which of course have a range of opposition MPs and spokespeople on them. As these committees will continue to meet virtually, that will allow us to balance safety and scrutiny. We'll use the next week to see if there are other enhancements we can make. I would add that these types of alternative arrangements are commonplace around the world as other parliaments manage outbreaks in their countries also. So, to recap, we're currently in level 4. We will all be here until Friday when we review the settings for the country, other than Auckland, who will stay at level 4 until next Tuesday with a review the day prior. This gives us the chance to consider as often as we can whether we are safe to move, depending on where in the country you are. Our plan has worked before, and together we can make it work again, so please stay strong, stay home, and be kind, and let's finish what we started. Before I open up for questions, I have a quick update on Afghanistan. The first group of New Zealand citizens and their families, alongside some other visa holders, have been successfully evacuated from Afghanistan and will arrive in Auckland this afternoon. Due to a range of security and privacy considerations, we'll be not providing any further comment on the number of evacuees as the deployment is ongoing. Of course, at the conclusion of deployment, we will be looking to provide numbers. But I can say that the group were evacuated from Afghanistan to the United Arab Emirates, where arrangements were made for their travel to New Zealand with the help of Australia's Defence Force. They've been transferred to an Air New Zealand commercial flight that is part of our freight scheme. The group will undergo 14 days within a managed isolation facility, just like anyone else entering New Zealand at this time. I know when the time presents itself that New Zealanders will go out of their way to make those who have returned home today feel at home. I do want to thank our partners, Australia, the United Arab Emirates, and the US, who worked on securing the airport, for their continued support in what remains a very difficult situation on the ground. I also want to pass on my thanks to the multiple agencies and personnel working around the clock to ensure the return of our citizens. The window to evacuate people out of Afghanistan is unfortunately very limited. And despite our ongoing efforts, we cannot guarantee we can assist all those who are seeking to evacuate. We are monitoring the situation and continue to work urgently with our international partners for the safe return of New Zealanders and those who have supported New Zealand. Now, happy to take your questions. Jessica.
So what buffer is it giving you for the extra 4 days till Friday for the places outside of Auckland?
Well, it gives us that longer period of time where we know that everyone has been at their homes once we had everyone relocate for that period. It gives us additional data. It gives us additional testing across the known contacts who have been at those locations of interest and who are spread throughout the country. And that gives us a level of reassurance. We'll also be looking at wastewater results, which are dotted throughout all parts of the country. And, of course, looking to see if we have any new cases, have they been in isolation for their entirety of their infectious period? So that's what we'll be looking for.
On current modelling, is there any way that Auckland could come out before the 31st? And also, I know that we're still 2 weeks out, but what should Auckland anticipate? Is there every possibility that they will be able to go down after the 31st?
Yeah, I'll give Dr. Bloomfield a chance on this one as well. But I think what we're trying to balance at the moment for Auckland is just giving a sense of really what we can see from the outbreak at the moment and realistically when we might expect to see cases peak, but also allowing ourselves to keep checking in to see whether or not there are any alterations we can make. Aucklanders, I think, will see this data and will know that 2 weeks at this point is a given. And so we've said, yes, we absolutely believe we are going to need to go through till next Tuesday. But actually, let's check in again then, see how we're looking, see what the outbreak is doing and see whether we've reached that peak of the outbreak yet or not. Dr. Bloomfield.
Just one thing to add. So Tuesday will be 2 weeks then in alert level 4 in Auckland where most of the potential exposure happened before the alert level change came in. If we compare that with the rest of the country, and particularly the South Island, the big exposure events we're concerned about were 2 Saturdays ago. So this Friday will be 14 days since those exposure events that we're particularly concerned about.
Yeah, Gina.
This isn't really a short, sharp lockdown anymore. Are you worried about lockdown fatigue?
Well, actually, I would say relative to what we've seen from other countries, this absolutely is a go hard, go early approach. You know, many other places around the world, you've seen more of a light and long. That's never been New Zealand's take on the way to challenge COVID and get on top of it. So we are still absolutely keeping with that strategy. You'll remember that our go hard, go early strategy when COVID first entered our shores looked like this as well. Of course, over that period of time, relative to the rest of the world, it was very much short and sharp.
And did Dr. Bloomfield recommend for the lockdown to be extended, level 4 to be extended through to midnight Sunday? And why didn't you go with that advice?
We followed his advice. Keep in mind, Dr. Bloomfield often iteratively shares with us advice and then comes onto a cabinet call and based on the data we get at 9 a.m. that morning, then gives us his latest reflections. But I'll let him speak to his own advice.
Yes, certainly. My advice was, and based on consultation advice from my team, was for the whole country through to Friday and indeed extending Auckland out that longer period.
Please, what's happening with the...
Sorry, and then I'll come to you, Jane.
Are you effectively saying that it's quite likely that all regions outside Auckland will move to level 3 if there are no unconnected cases from now until then, or is it more of a case we need more visibility on where those contacts are?
Yes. Look at it, the way that I would describe it, we do need more information. We need more certainty. We don't want to take any risks with Delta. If the world has taught us anything, it is to be cautious with this variant of COVID-19. Having said that, we do believe that that is an appropriate check-in point because we do want to look at whether or not we've seen any of those locations of interest present then as challenges in other parts of the country like the South Island, whether or not we've seen cases there, whether we've seen wastewater results there. So that felt like an appropriate check-in. It also gives us a decent amount of time once everyone's stayed put after we've had that relocation period. Yeah, I'll let Derek finish, yeah?
Can you clarify whether there's been any of today's cases have been from the locations of interest you identified yesterday as concerned, like the Māngere troops on Sunday? Can you also clarify, you also mentioned a few cases among Auckland University students? Auckland University has been in touch with us and said that they are aware of that, so maybe you mean AUT, can you clarify that as well?
On the first point, yes, most of our emergent cases now are. It is quite clear at first glance that there is a link to existing cases, and a number of the new ones are associated today with the AOG church service 2 Sundays ago. Likewise, I don't have the number off the top of my head. Likewise, even in Wellington, all the newly emergent cases in Wellington are connected with and are close contacts of known cases, and all bar one had been in isolation for the full period of their infectivity. So the picture in Wellington is reassuring at the moment, but obviously we continue to watch closely. On the University of Auckland, there was a little bit of confusion in our initial assessment, and this relates to the student who travelled from Auckland to Wellington. It was one of the cases, is a University of Auckland student. My understanding is there is one other University of Auckland student who has tested positive. Now, I'm not sure if it's related to that original one and the same exposure event, but that's the information I have.
It appears to be coming from the ball that you mentioned.
Could be. The student who travelled here to Wellington was in a hall of residence in Auckland, and that hall of residence, about 500 students who have now dispersed around the country, and so that's a very important group that we're following up.
One final, if I may just make an observation before I come to you, Jane. One of the things that we're seeing in the reports from when we're briefed by the Public Health Unit is that they are being very clear that whilst they may not have established a person-to-person link with the cases that have come through in any one tranche when they're reported in the morning, they are very quickly identifying location links. Now, that's actually a bit of a difference in perhaps what we've seen in previous outbreaks. We always were driving for those person-to-person links, but in a Delta environment, simply being in the same place is building that connection to these clusters, and that demonstrates, I guess, really the way that Delta's behaving. Yeah, Jane.
What more can you tell us about the investigation into the walkway at the Crown Plaza? Are there more than one walkways? And also, do you think you're zeroing in on the potential exposure point?
Dr. Bloomfield, he knows that I'm particularly obsessed with source investigations, which is not a new thing for me. So you will have heard some discussion yesterday around, for the Crown Plaza, there's been some debate from some people around the exercise area of the Crown Plaza. The individual in question, as we've already traversed, did not access the exercise area because they did not clear a positive test and so weren't able to. So that then leaves in play the question of the atrium, which is separated from the public, and the public area, as Public Health keep reminding us, is well ventilated. They have, however, sought to identify from the footage that they have some members of the public, a small number that were in the vicinity of the atrium at the time. They have located the majority of those, and they have been tested. They're just looking from, I recall, 2 more. So nothing further required from the general public on that source investigation at present.
Is that the most likely, or pretty much narrowing down to the only potential contact?
We're keeping open the lines of investigation at this point of time, so we continue to do all the work that you would expect us to do in MIF, continuing to look at all movements or footage or staff, whilst investigating that other possibility. But at this stage, there's nothing really concrete to report.
No, open mind on all options, as the Prime Minister said. Staff movements, we know we had all the staff have tested negative at least once, I think bar one who was being followed up. So keeping open-minded is really important at this point in time.
We've just on the people outside of the lobby, I can confirm, obviously 3 have already tested negative. one in the process of getting a test and 2 still yet to be identified, and that's what the police is assisting us with. Jane, I'll let you finish on that and then I'll come to Joe.
On contact tracing, how are you gearing up? How many extra people do you have? Is the system able to deal with this massive number of contacts and locations of interest?
It's certainly a stretch on the system, and the reason being that we've taken this very broad approach to considering virtually everybody as a close contact. And so we have brought all the extra surge capacity on board from our public health units, and in addition to that, today we have brought on additional call centre we're bringing on additional call centre capacity. The key reason here being that close contacts all require daily follow-up, and we're also moving, as I said yesterday, to do electronic daily follow-up to free up our people across the country to be able to do those first calls and make sure people know what's expected of them.
Just the specific extensions?
We will come back with you to you on that.
Yeah, so we're bringing on extra capacity across government departments at the moment. So we've got additional capacity coming out of MB today. We're also looking, if I recall correctly, out of the Ministry of Justice to bring in extra capacity. At the same time, our public health units are doing a sterling job in amongst those 13,000 contacts, triaging those that are the most critical for us, because there'll be some that actually, they're on the peripheries, but we're just being really cautious, and some that they really need to prioritise, and they're undertaking that work as well. We'll see if we can get some numbers for you, though.
Joe? Just a few questions
and then I'll come to you
from the Crown Plaza investigation.
Yeah.
Are you aware of any other public thoroughfares, walkways and any other MIQ facilities? There is a vaccination centre that's about 20 metres away from this area that seems to be the problem, so is that sensible still given the circumstances? Why didn't you get the media to try and find these 2 people that are still outstanding? And also, Newsroom contacted MB a month ago raising the public walkways as an issue, so why wasn't anything done?
Well, the public walkway at this stage is not being established to be an issue. Of course, we are exploring everything, and as you've said, the public walkway, of course, does still have barriers between and ventilation, and has been assessed by those who undertake our infection controls, and the ventilation on that building had been assessed too. Having said that, we've got to explore everything. We can't be closed-minded when we're looking at the source investigation. So as yet, we've ruled nothing in or out right now. On the individuals, finding the 2 other individuals, look, that's a decision between the public health unit and police as to whether or not they need to do anything more broadly there. They have successfully found some of those members of the public, so we leave those decisions up to them. Did you want to comment on some of those other questions, Dr. Bloomfield?
I don't know. You raised a question of a vaccination centre that's nearby. I'll look into that.
Yeah, so we're aware of it, but there's been... Yes. I believe that has already been raised for us just to ensure that all of the measures that you would expect, but again, nothing has been led to suggest that is the source of our problem here.
The other question was whether you're aware of any other public thoroughfares and any other MIQ facilities, and yesterday, Dr. Bloomfield, when you told me that it was the public walkway at fault, were you unaware of the atrium thoroughfare?
On the latter, yes. I didn't realise it was the atrium issue per se. And on the other, rest assured that every time we get an issue arise in a single managed isolation facility, that is then looked at right across all the facilities. That's why we did, when we first identified ventilation systems as potentially a problem in the Pullman Hotel, we started there but did assessments of all the ventilation systems. So we'll come back to you formally, but we can come back, our MIQ colleagues can come back on any other walkways that have been looked at.
Yeah, to be fair to Dr. Bloomfield, the walkway and atrium gets a little conflated from time to time, but the public health units, obviously, they work very, very closely with the managed isolation facility team for all of their case investigations, and I'm always incredibly impressed into the level of detail they go through, down to the minute of the movement of an individual to try and isolate what may have happened. Sorry, I had News Hub with a question on the Crown Plaza too.
Sorry, Jenny. I'll ask you. Why is the Crown Plaza still open then when you have shut down other MIQ hotels while you're completing those investigations?
Well, actually, I'll let Dr. Bloomfield speak to future use and some of the decisions being made there, but as yet we have not yet established what precisely the issue is. But of course, all of the protocols that you would expect, mask use, social distancing within the buildings, limited movement around buildings, all reinforced. But we are looking at some extra precautions at the Crowne Plaza while we undertake this investigation.
So it's still open because there are still people there. However, they have stopped any new intakes while they assess and really get confident around this issue.
I know you held up.
I'll let you finish that question.
That heat map before Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Do we know the number of close contacts that are isolating in the South Island?
So contacts over 100, and so those will be from a range of locations of interest. But as I said, that is of those known individuals. For some of those really large sites, like, for instance, university campuses, we have, certainly the halls of residence is one way that we can establish where people may have had contact. But when you're working with Delta, we have been taking a cautious approach, and so we have been putting a ring around our large locations. So those are known contacts, and it's over 100.
And knowing what we know now about Delta, should we have ever opened the bubble with Australia, and will we ever get it back?
Keep in mind, the bubble was closed at the time that this occurred, and so this just demonstrates how difficult Delta is. And with vaccination protocols and testing protocols and all of the constant reviewing of infection protection controls and cohorting, it just shows that ultimately this is still a very hard virus. So, look, I stand by all of the decisions at the time we made them. They were made with the best information possible. But as this virus has changed, we have too, and that's been the right thing to do. So I'll start planning around. Henry.
On Wellington, at this point, are you saying that all the infections have been either within a household or from people who are from Auckland who possibly got infected in Auckland? And does that mean that at this point there is no one, I guess, infections and cases of interest in Wellington?
There is one person who's not from a household, but that was from an interaction in a healthcare facility. That was identified very quickly. Otherwise, yes, they are within households. No cases from any of the locations of interest that those cases here might have visited. And the other thing to point out too is we've not had any positive cases in Coromandel, where we know initially there were a number of locations of interest. So that's promising. And I guess these next 3 to 4 days will really give us an indication of, in Wellington and Coromandel in particular, whether there is any ongoing transmission or whether our ongoing transmission is really confined to Auckland.
Yeah,
Auckland, are you looking at not just the board but also some of the large lectures that may have been attended by that student?
Yes, so the places of interest include lecture theatres at the time the student was there. Yes.
When will you be confident, I guess, whether some of those high-risk places were super spreader events? It's clear that some of them had some spread, like this church, but we haven't really seen an explosion of cases yet. Are you starting to get confident that there was no super spreading, or is it too early?
I think we're all wanting to wait it out.
We're looking hard. The event, the single event with the most number of cases is the AOG Assembly of God church event, but that was actually for quite a few hours on a Sunday. So people were together a long time. And if you think about the sorts of activities that happen at church events with singing and probably a lot of interaction between people, it's not surprising.
If you do end up having part of the country at level 4 and part of the country out of level 4, will you relook at how essential workers can travel between those locations based on Delta, maybe making vaccination requirements for truckers?
So Cabinet had a really good discussion around some of these hypothetical questions and issues that will need to be worked through if we are to have a situation where we have borders and different alert levels for different parts of the country. So too early to say right now, but what we'll be considering over the next coming days is how do we ensure that we do this as efficiently and as effectively as possible. In the past, we've tended to have 3 and 2 boundaries. We need to consider the range. What if you had a 4 and a 3? For instance, what will that mean for movement? How do we ensure that we don't have parts of the country cut off from other parts of the country if we need that essential movement? And how do we ensure that those who are part of our logistical supply chains don't pose risk to themselves and others? So those are all things that over the course of this week we're continuing to do planning for. Our Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, our team there have been working on this already. So already we've got a range of boundary options to help us with those future decisions. Yeah, in the front.
The heat map and the 13,000 odd contacts across the country. Do we know how many are still to be contacted or still to be found?
Yes, so actually the number's now over 14,000 as it's sort of 1:30 this afternoon. Of those, just over half have been contacted and are in the system, and the vast majority of the ones that haven't yet are ones that have come through just yesterday and today.
And could you just clarify just how many is it now? How many
just over 14,000, and the vast majority are considered close contacts. Actually, there's about just over 300 that are very close contacts, but the vast majority are close contacts.
Yeah, so those are ones for those very large events where we've just said we consider you all to be at risk. In the front.
How concerned are you of those two members of the public who haven't been found yet in relation to the Crown Plaza? And we've also heard a student from Greenbay High School has tested positive for COVID. Is that going to be a location of interest?
I'll leave the second question to Dr. Bloomfield. Keep in mind, when we're briefed in the morning, often they are still undertaking source investigation and interviewing, which can take many hours, so we won't always have that level of detail for every new case. The information we get and we're most interested in is, do we believe they're linked? Because when we get mystery cases, that's where we have extra concerns. On the issue of whether or not we're concerned that there are two members of the public who are outside of the atrium walled area near the Crown Plaza, look, it's a line of inquiry. It's not that we've identified that they are the source of any potential spread. They're a line of inquiry, and it would be really good to be able to finally answer that question. So we're in level 4. We've locked everyone down. We've got everyone at home bar essential workers. So we want to find them to answer those questions, but we also are looking inside the MIF as well to see.
Just on the other question, I'm not specifically aware of someone from Green Bay High, but what I would say is cases will be being reported to the public health unit during the day from the labs, and as soon as they get on the phone to those people and find locations of interest, particularly like a school, they will act on that information promptly without waiting, of course, for it to become a part of our numbers for the next day.
Dr. Bloomfield.
Yeah, Ben.
Can I ask for two sets of data that you probably have in the numbers, either yourself or Dr. Bloomfield? First of all, how many of the infected people require hospital-level care?
Yes.
Yesterday?
Yep.
And also, how many of the people that have tested positive so far have been vaccinated?
I'll grab the vaccinated question, and if Dr. Bloomfield grabs the hospitalisations. My recollection, because I was doing a rough count this morning, and forgive me that it will be rough, it'll be off the top of my head, but I believe it was somewhere in the order of 11 or so. Keeping in mind, I don't have whether or not they were first dose or fully, but keeping in mind there's a large number in this particular outbreak who won't necessarily have become eligible. What I'll be interested in keeping an eye on is whether or not the Delta hits that person and then stops. You know, you'll recall that for our fully vaccinated person who was the wife of our original case, negative tests, and that demonstrates that vaccine does in some have the ability to stop a possible chain of transmission.
Thanks, Prime Minister. So as at 9 this morning, we had there are 7 people from the outbreak who are in hospital, none in ICU. That's across the 3 Auckland hospitals. There is 1 person in ICU who has COVID, and that's the person who came from Fiji a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
So I'll ask Prime Minister on a different subject. COVID zero is getting a bad rap. Australia seems to have walked away from the idea based on the New South Wales outbreak, now focusing on hospitalisations rather than overall case numbers. Just what would it mean to you for New Zealand to be able to achieve it again after doing so spectacularly last year?
Well, look, so what you're speaking to is an elimination strategy, and I certainly can't speak but only observe what different states in Australia are doing. And so, you've got Western Australia and Queensland with their approaches, and then obviously the devastating circumstances of New South Wales. We can only look at what's best for us. And we know an elimination strategy has worked for New Zealand before. That's the way that we have managed to have a larger number of days where we have been without restrictions than countries like the UK or like the United States. And not had our people gravely ill and hospitalised and unfortunately losing their lives. So for now, the elimination strategy is the right thing for New Zealand. It means getting those cases back down to a point where we can remove our restrictions again and, importantly, continue with our vaccination program, because that will be the thing that in the future lessens the need for this, which is so important for everyone. Yes.
Dr. Bloomfield, just on the church, has there been difficulty reaching out to Pacific church leaders and getting them to pass on the information to their congregations, and what's being done by health officials to make sure that that flow of information around isolating and testing is running smoothly?
Well, as we found in the past, actually, the right engagement with particularly the church leaders is absolutely the way to go. And both health and non-health community leaders have been engaging very positively with the church. There was a Zoom call last night with many from the church that was very successful with Pacific Health leaders and others. So there's very active engagement between community leaders, the public health unit, and others. And yesterday there was very high number of hundreds of tests done of people who had been at the service 2 weeks ago. So once again, as we saw last August and indeed even in February this year, very good engagement from the Pacific community, and they've had the highest rates of testing again through this Auckland outbreak.
I'll come to you, and then I'll come back over to Jane.
Thank you. Will Cabinet consider making the $2,000 course-related cost accessible to all students, not just those who started last year during level 4?
That's not been something that we've considered. I'd be happy to put your question to the Minister of Education, but at this stage, Cabinet has not considered anything beyond, of course, the usual access to government support through work and income, and also resurgence support and wage subsidy. I'll come back to you, Jane.
Just following on from Ben's question, so at what point do you then review that elimination strategy? Chris Hipkins referred to the need potentially to review it sometime in the future. What difference has Delta made to that strategy, and at what point do you go, this may not be feasible for the long term?
Well, you'll see that actually only, what was it, a week ago, we had the forum with Professor Skegg presenting his advice based on what Delta was showing us about what our strategy might look like in the next, beyond the next 6 months, so going into 2022. And already we were adapting what that approach would look like next year. And we've done that all the way through. Whenever we have a new advice or a new experience ourselves, we'll check our settings and whether or not they're fit for purpose from our experience with Delta. I think, or with COVID-19, I should say. So for now, absolutely elimination is the strategy, particularly while we vaccinate our people. Going through into next year, we'll continue to get the advice of our public health officials and our external advisors and experts, as we've always done, and say, look, here was our experience through this outbreak. Does it change our approach going forward? And I expect we will continue to do that over the coming months.
And when you start those phased, if that plan goes and the phased border openings, there may potentially be a level of tolerance at that point for COVID in the community?
Yeah, look, what I would want to do is really bring in our experts on this discussion and debate. For now, everyone is in agreement. Elimination is the strategy. There is no discussion or debate amongst any of us about that, because that is the safest option for us while we continue to vaccinate our people. Going into next year, let's continue to get their advice, but I would say that's always been our approach, constantly learning, constantly adapting. I'll come back to you, and then Thomas, I'll come to you.
Thank you. The CLARE system, which is the National Repository for Testing Results, went down today. And what impact did that have on the turnaround for test results?
Yes, so I understand it was down for a couple of hours in the middle of the day, and the testing centres reverted to manual processes and a prior electronic ordering system they had. It will cause us a delay in turnaround times, but the team will work hard to make that time back up again.
And how are delays for testing results at the moment? We've been told there can be up to days for people to get their results back. Sort of, where are they? What's the average, and what's the longest that tests are?
Depends on where you were swabbed.
It depends on where you were swabbed, and our delays are really in Auckland, where the largest volume of testing has been done, and particularly for people who've had a swab done by a general practice or urgent care clinic in the community, because most of those places are not using their CLARE system and e-ordering, so the e-ordering through the Eclair system does very much speed up that process. So there is a bit of a backlog, but just to provide a comparison, in the first 3 days of this outbreak, there were about 69,000 tests processed. If you compare that with August last year in the outbreak, there was 41,000 tests. So there are a lot more tests that have been able to be processed more quickly during this outbreak.
I'll come to you, and then I'm going to come to Māori TV and Whāti. Yeah.
Dr. Bloomfield, how long did you advise the delay of the return of Parliament, and do you think that it is appropriate for Auckland MPs, say, next Tuesday to return to Wellington if Parliament returns next Tuesday?
So at this stage, my advice was suspension of it for this week. And as the Prime Minister said, that still the select committees are going to run, and then I'm sure I'll be asked for further advice over the next weekend or on Monday about whether it should return next week.
Do you think if COVID continues to circulate in Auckland, would it be advisable for Auckland MPs to be allowed to return to Parliament?
Oh, well, let's see what the results show this week. I mean, that will be tied up with the decision around what happens to Auckland generally.
Prime Minister, Scott Morrison wrote in the weekend an op-ed about his change in COVID strategy. He's now saying that they're targeting 70 to 80% vaccination rates rather than a lockdown-based strategy. Given what the Skegg report published, is COVID circulating in Australia with high vaccination rates in Australia compatible with a more porous border with New Zealand?
Well, look, not for the period in which we are vaccinating our people, no. But we've always said that we wouldn't open up and have quarantine-free travel with a place in which there was COVID in wide circulation, because that was incompatible with our desire to maintain an elimination strategy, work on high rates of vaccination, and have as many freedoms as possible without that risk of lockdown. I'll come over to Whāti.
Kia ora. Do we know the ethnicities of the current cases in New Zealand, and do we also know whether or not Māori have been disproportionately affected?
We have got some information on ethnicity.
p.m. Friday. Lockdown extended for Auckland by another week until Tuesday, 11:59 p.m, August the 31st. The Prime Minister said this was the safest option to hold the course for longer. Parliament is being suspended, and there are now 315 plus locations of interest, creating a huge job for contact tracers. Well, let's go to Auckland now, where reporter Vardna Barn is by the Crown Plaza, which investigators are looking into as a source of this Auckland outbreak.